All right, well, good evening, everyone. I know that we have reference sheets coming. They are being copied as we speak. But let me start with the question, who speaks Yiddish over here or Hebrew? Because these words that I'm about to use are used both in Hebrew. You know what, I prefer without a microphone. It makes it more human. So who speaks Yiddish? Just by the quick raise of the hand. A little bit? Okay, well, these words are very common, both in English, both in Yiddish and in Hebrew. Do you know the words nudnik? Okay. All right, so you know the word nudnik, you know the word shlumiel, okay, and you know the word shleimazel. Okay, good. All right, so then if you all know these words, well, let me just explain. A nudnik is a nudge, someone who doesn't stop barking at you or asking questions. A shlumiel is someone who is just clumsy, and the shleimazel is someone who has no luck. Okay? Now, what's the real difference between the three? Do you know what it is? Well, to give you just an image, the shlumiel is the one holding the soup and by mistake falling on someone. The person he falls on is the shleimazel. And the nudnik wants to know what type of soup it was. So you have people like that all around us, right? We all deal with shleimazels, nudniks, shlumiels, and all sorts of other difficult people. And this class is really an attempt to give us some tools to know how to deal with these difficult people, because they could get on our nerves, to say the least, especially the nudnik. I don't know which one you hate the most. I hate the nudnik the most. Shleimazels, it's not their fault, you know? They were born like that. And shlumiels, you can't blame them. But the nudniks. But it's fine. Even nudniks we can deal with. I'm going to wait a little bit for the reference sheets to come. But I will tell you a story that ties with this. Do you know that there was once a woman who came to a rabbi and said to the rabbi, you know, I need some time. I have many problems in my life. The rabbi says, sure, sit down. And she speaks for an hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours. At the end of those 3 hours, she says to the rabbi, thank you so much. And I didn't even know when I came in to see you that you're a miracle worker. He says, I'm no miracle worker. I'm just a rabbi. She says, yes, you're a miracle worker. He says, why do you say so? She says, because when I came in, I had a terrible headache. And now after 3 hours, you made it disappear. Miracle. He says, it didn't disappear. It just went from your head to my head. So, indeed, we have people who give us headaches. Of course, no one gives me headaches. I'm not that rabbi in the story. You can speak to me for 3 hours, for 5 hours. It's all right. It's good. Because I have to live according to what I teach. Otherwise, I shouldn't be teaching them. Okay. You know, David Hume was a Scottish philosopher in the 19th century. And he was a complete atheist. But he would go to church from time to time. So his friend once asked him, well, how come you go to church? You're an atheist. He says, I go to listen to the minister. He says, but you don't even believe what the minister has to say. He says, you're right, I don't believe what the minister has to say, but he believes in what he says. And from time to time, it's good to listen to someone who believes in what he says. We lose that art, especially in the marketing world, where everything is about branding, marketing, and we don't really connect. But I think it's important to believe in what we say. So that's why I meant it. If you come and speak to me for 5 hours, that's all right. I believe in what I say. Are the references coming or not? Otherwise, I could continue with some stories. But okay, she's on her way. Fine. Okay, you know what? I'll start without the references, and then you'll catch up. If you want to read them, you can catch up and read them yourselves. But I think there are many steps towards dealing with difficult peoples, whether shlumiels, shleimazels, and others. There are many steps and many layers how to deal with these difficult people. But I think the first and foremost layer, really Jewishly, I'm not a therapist, and thankfully we'll have a therapist afterwards who will speak about the psychological and therapeutical aspects of it. But Jewishly, see, the Torah already commands us that not only do we have to shy away from difficult people, but commands us to deal with them in a very specific way. And you may be familiar with the commandment in Leviticus, but Leviticus chapter 19 has some of the most important interrelationship commandments. One of them is, of course, 19:18 is V'ahavta l'racha kamocha, you should love your fellow like yourself. Hillel, the sage, said that that's the most important commandment in the entire Torah, but there's also another one. That other one says, B'tzedek tishpot et amitecha, which means with justice you shall judge your fellow. With justice you shall judge your fellow. What does that mean? So the Talmud obviously has to delve into all of the different aspects of these verses. When it speaks about this verse, the Talmud says, well, there are two interpretations. It says you shall judge, so maybe this commandment only refers to judges. Okay, judges should judge everyone with complete justice. You can't find favor or show favor or even think favor towards one side over the other. For example, and gives very specific examples. For example, you can't let one side speak more than the other. That's not fair. Just speak more than the other. You can't. You can't interrogate one side with a set of questions and not use the same set of questions with the other side. So with justice, you shall judge your fellow really only relates to judges sitting in court. But then there's a second interpretation on which many volumes and volumes and volumes of Jewish books were written. And that second interpretation from the Talmud says, Heved dan et kol ha'adam lechav zechut. What the Torah really says, that you should judge everyone favorably. If you're in a situation in which you are forced to judge someone, maybe because it's dealing with your own life too, then judge that person favorably. Judge the person favorably. Which means, of course, that you should give him the benefit of the doubt. You see, that expression wasn't made up by the American culture. It comes from the Bible itself, from the Talmud and obviously from the Bible. Give the benefit of the doubt. I'll share with you a quick story, but I remember when I was a teenager living in Jerusalem, I once had to catch a minyan for Mincha. Mincha is the afternoon prayer, and when it gets dark, you start looking at your watch and you say, well, maybe I'm going to pass the time. I better catch a minyan, find somewhere to pray. Obviously, I can pray by myself, but in Jerusalem, you have thousands and thousands of minyans. If you've been to Jerusalem, you may have also been to the Shtiblach. The Shtiblach is a place in Old Katamon. You familiar with Old Katamon, the Old Katamon neighborhood that has minyans 24 hours a day. So Shacharit begins, the morning minyan begins at 6 a.m. and it goes on for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, then the next minyan comes, and the next minyan comes, and the next minyan comes. There's a place like that in Bnei Brak, there's a place like that in Jerusalem, and I was told, I don't know if it's true, maybe, but there's a place like that in Beersheba. But the Shtiblach is a place where I used to pray, but when I was looking for that minyan, on that specific day, I was in the city center, and there was no Shtiblach next to me. It's Shtiblach in Old Kantama. Finally, I found a little tiny synagogue, and they had a minyan. I was number 10. I came in, I started praying, and I couldn't concentrate. I just couldn't. Why? There was a father who came in with these 4 kids. These 4 kids were the wildest kids. Now, being a father, I see that they weren't as wild as I thought they were. But, see, that's why you have to judge them favorably. But I thought at the moment, as a teenager, of course, you're the center of the world. So they're the wildest kids in the world. And I started judging them, and they're bothering me. And I started judging the father, saying what he can't control his children. And it's disturbing. And then the end of the prayer comes. And at the end of the Mincha prayer, is the mourner's Kaddish. And when that Kaddish comes, the father calls his children and says, come, let's say Kaddish together. See, they had just lost their mother. And I started beating myself up, saying, how dare I? I'm judging them. They're running all over. They just lost their mother. How can you even fathom what they must be going through right now? And I was reminded again of this biblical commandment of Heveh dan et kol ha'adam lechav zechut, that you shall judge everyone favorably. But within that commandment that really was well interpreted with the words that we just used in Hebrew by the Mishnah, by the ethics of our fathers, Heveh dan et kol ha'adam lechav zechut, we find yet another tool. And this tool was actually developed by the Maharal of Prague based on these words of the Mishnah. The Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Lau, was the chief rabbi of Prague in it's a process. Okay, that's fine. We'll judge them favorably. But the copiers. But Rabbi Yehuda Lau, he was the chief rabbi of Prague in the early 1600s. He was also credited for, and I don't know if this is a legend, if it's a true story, but credited for creating a golem. You may have heard of that. A golem, which is a monster to fight anti-Semites in Prague. They were constantly attacked by, the Jewish community was constantly attacked by many Jew haters in Prague. In fact, there were blood libels at that time. And the Maharal of Prague decided to create this monster to fight them. And they were just petrified by this monster that they left the Jews alone. In fact, if you go to Prague today, you can go and visit the Alt New Shul, which is the synagogue of the Maharal of Rabbi Yehuda Lau. And they tell you, the tour guides tell you, don't go up to the second floor. Why? Because the golem is imprisoned there. He's been imprisoned there for hundreds of years. And he might just let his wrath upon you. So don't go. But Rabbi Yehuda Lau, besides his creation of the golem, was truly a holy man. He was probably the foremost Kabbalist. And he takes this verse and I think gives us one of the most effective tools about dealing with people, with difficult people. See, if you look at the words of the Mishnah themselves, what does it say? And I wish you had the reference sheets in front of you, but it says, Heveh dan et kol ha'adam lechav zechut. Heveh dan et kol ha'adam lechav zechut. You should judge not every man favorably, but there's almost a spelling mistake there. You should judge the man favorably. Kol ha'adam. Kol ha'adam. You should say kol adam, not kol ha'adam. Right? Every man, not every the man. Why every the man? And the Maharal says, because you see, in order to judge someone favorably, we have to look at the man and his entirety. Kol ha'adam. You have to look at the entire picture. Look at the entire picture. Who knows? Maybe you're missing something. Maybe you're focusing just on one detail. And you're judging that person based on that one little detail, based on those kids climbing the walls. What if you look at the entire picture? Things that you don't know, your judgment will change. Your negative judgment will change. If you start seeing the entirety of the person, then you'll judge them favorably. You know, part of our mistake, of our great mistakes as human beings, is that we get stuck in details. It's a good quality to have. You know, in Judaism, we don't find that Judaism elaborates on any negative qualities. Because every quality has the potential to be good and bad. Christianity has 7 cardinal sins, for example, greed, envy, and so on. Judaism doesn't have cardinal sins. Anything can be good or bad. So the focus on details, the attention to details can be good. It can be good. If you micromanage, it might be bad. And if you use those details to judge people negatively, then it's also bad. There's another beautiful example in the Torah that where we focus on details and it really contaminates us. But we find that in the 10th commandment of the 10 commandments. Do you remember what the 10th commandment is? First one is, I am God, your Lord. The 10th one is, remember? Come on, someone.
Don't covet.
What?
Don't covet.
Who said that? Thank you. Don't covet. Don't covet. Don't be jealous. Lo tachmod. Right? Now, if you read the entire verse, it's fascinating. If you read the entire verse, the commandment itself, God tells us, or Moses conveyed God's words on Mount Sinai to us as follows: Lo tachmod eshet re'echa. You shouldn't be jealous of the wife of your friend, of his slave, of his donkey, of his maiden servant. and of everything that your friend has. V'chol asher l're'echa. Now the question is, well, if you are going to say everything, why enumerate the other details? You said everything. That will include his slave. That will include his wife. That will include everything else. Just say everything. And the answer is very simple. You see, where does jealousy come from? Jealousy comes from this same type of attention to details. We say to ourselves, oh, I love my neighbor's car. But then you say, well, would you like to live like your neighbor 24/7? Oh, no, not really. There's things in his life I don't really like. His car I would love to have. But we say, but it comes with the full package. He can't just have his car and not have the rest of his life. And therefore, the Torah very, very carefully tells us, yes, you're paying attention to these details. You're saying just his wife, just his maidservant, just his donkey. You have to look at everything. If you look at everything, your judgment will change. Then you'll start thinking differently. Same goes with people. You have to look at the entire picture really in order to know how to deal with them. And then that difficulty in them will appear so simple, will appear so smooth. I think that's tool one. Heved dan et kol ha'adam lechav zechut. You know the famous experiment that was once made by a teacher who also dealt with students who were judgmental the whole time and so on. And all she did, and I may have done this in the past because I do it often, not because I deal with difficult people, never. But, I don't have a pen on me, but she took a white piece of paper. This is not white, as you can tell. But she then drew a small dot, a small black dot. And she asked the students, what do you see? Obviously, all the students said, a black dot. And she says, there's so much whiteness. That's fine. Thank you. You can try it at home. Try it with your kids. Try it with your friends. She says to them, there's so much whiteness. All you can focus on is the black dot. Is that all you can focus on? Same goes with life. Same goes with people. I think that, therefore, is the first crucial tool. Number one, and here come the reference sheets. Right, Sabrina? Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm happy they're coming now because the very last reference that emphasizes this thought, I want to read out loud. And then we'll go to number 2.
Okay, as we're passing them out, there are 3 pieces of paper. They're not stable.
Ah.
So don't separate it and give one to your neighbor. Okay? Keep all of it.
Fine. Okay. You know what? Those who did receive them, let's pick someone and maybe we can have a volunteer read the very last part of this first thought.
When you attribute evil motives to a person performing a negative act, your brain swells with negative energy. On the other hand, if you train yourself to view the person, unlike his behavior, in a positive light, you save your heart from being consumed by ire.
Okay, and I think this is a good segue to point number 2. But it's a brilliant point. You see, when a person is filled with negativity, it affects him. It affects him. He fills himself not just with negativity, but I call it with toxicity. You become toxic. When you judge others negatively, you're not just throwing negativity on others. You're throwing, first and foremost, negativity on yourself. You're absorbing it. And it kills from within. Negative people are hurting themselves more than they are hurting others. They say that hatred hurts the hater more than the hated. It does. That's because you are consumed with it. Your brain can't function as well, as smoothly, as clearly as it could, because it has something that weighs on it that becomes extremely toxic. So I think this last thought, I think, is tremendously important. You know, speaking about the way I couldn't concentrate in prayer, there's a great story with Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach who tells the story. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach was a singing rabbi, celebrated around the world. He would go from city to city, all across the world to perform and to sing with his guitar. You may be familiar with him. They called him the Soul Doctor. In fact, Broadway just had a show, and I think they had another one. They repeated it because it was so successful, called The Soul Doctor, on Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach and his performances around the world. And his songs, many of his songs, became just part of our liturgy everywhere. I don't know if you're familiar with the song Am Yisrael Chai. That's the Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach song. David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. That's a Shlomo Carlebach song. There are many Carlebach songs that we don't even realize are Carlebach songs, but that's the type of influence he had on us until today. He passed away in 1996, I believe, I think it was, or 5 or 6. And it was a huge loss for the Jewish people. But he tells the story of how one day, in 1978, he gave a concert in Europe, and then he walked into a synagogue on Shabbat morning, and he realized that the chazan, the cantor, was just skipping words. He was mumbling. He wasn't saying the prayer. And he just became very upset. He said, I'm not staying here. I'm going to stay. I'm going to walk out. I'm going to pray by myself. I'm being distracted by this. He says, I have to come back for the Torah reading, at least to the Torah reading, hoping that he won't be leading it. He comes back for the Torah reading, and as they're escorting the Torah, he realizes that it's the chazan himself, this old man, carrying the Torah. And he looks at him, and he sees, boy, he's blind. They're helping him carry the Torah, and they're helping him walk. He's blind. So he asks about this man. He says, who is he? And who let him pray? If he's blind, why let him pray? And they tell him, you don't understand. This man was the chazan in the main synagogue of Lvov, of Lemberg, Poland, before the war. And the Nazis tortured him in ways you can't even fathom. They made him blind. But we've been asking him ever since he came to our synagogue to lead services, as he did. We knew that would restore his life. We knew that would revive his soul. But he's refused. This Shabbos, this morning, is the first time he accepted this position. And again, Shlomo Carlebach says to himself, oh my gosh, the only one that suffered from my negative judgment, from my criticism, is me. Me and my prayer. So one has to realize that beyond judging people favorably, then when you don't judge them favorably, the person that is being affected the most is you and yourself. I think that's why this verse in the book of Proverbs, written by King Solomon, the wisest of men, so he knew what he was doing. This verse, I believe, is one of the most important, if I dare say, who am I to say, but it's one of the most important, at least one of the most relevant verses in the Bible. At first, it's not so understood, but does anyone want to read the next verse here in Proverbs 27:19?
As in water, face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects the man.
Right. Kamayim apanim el apanim ken lev ha'adam el ha'adam. That's the verse in Hebrew. What does it mean? Just as when you go to a lake, when you go to a body of water, and you look inside the water, you see a reflection of yourself, so too it is with relationships of people. The way you look at others, that's the way they'll look back at you. If you look at the reflection of yourself in water smiling, you'll see yourself smiling. If you look at other people with a smile, they too will smile back at you. Not long ago there was a book, and I don't know, there's waves like that in our society that come and go, come and go. Thank God the Torah is eternal, it forever stays. But there was a book called The Secret. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it made many waves. And in it, they introduced what's called the law of attraction. Heard of it? Basically, they share the same message, that you attract what comes to you. So if you're positive, you'll attract positivity. If you're negative, you'll attract negativity. Where does it come from? From here. The book of Proverbs. King Solomon said it 3,000 years ago, way before the book of The Secret. But it's the same idea. The way we look at people, that's the way they will look back at us. So now, when we deal with someone that's difficult, we really have two options. One option is to say, yes, he's difficult. I can't stand him. That relationship will never heal. Because by saying that, you're attracting that upon yourself. That's what the other will say. I can't stand you. But if you try and create a shift in your mind saying, I love you, I love you, and I love you, eventually that person will say, I love you too. So what this teaches is really that by changing the way you think, it changes the way you feel. And by changing the way you think, that changes the way you feel, it will also change the way the other feels about you. It's profound, but it's very true. It's a human truth. If I go to try it on children works best because they're so innocent. So if you shout at a child, the child will close himself up and won't like you. If you relate to a child in a positive way, and there's studies on that the most effective teachers are teachers who believe in their children, then they'll believe in you. That's a human truth. There's a great story about how a teacher once came, it was a new teacher, and she needed a job desperately. She came to a school that was filled with difficult children. And on the first day, no one gave her any chances. People would say, well, this is the 7th teacher to this specific difficult class. She'll never last more than a week. She lasted a week, she lasted 2 weeks, she lasted, in fact, the whole year. They couldn't believe it. They truly couldn't believe it. They went back and asked the teacher, what was your secret? How do you deal with all these difficult children? She said, difficult children? That's not what I was told on the first day. What were you told on the first day? Well, I was given a list of all of my children with their IQs right next to them. I thought their IQs were very high. And they said to her, those weren't their IQs. Those were their locker numbers. But now we understand. Because you thought it was their IQs, you related to them as special children, as highly intelligent children. So reflected back on you, they accepted you. And once you had that flow, then nothing could stop you. The sky even wasn't the limit. Now, I know that, Maimonides, in many books, many books by the Abu Draham and others, Maimonides is referred to as Rofeh Nefashot. Rofeh Nefashot, the healer of souls. I think that's what psychotherapy really means, right? Psych means the mind, or the soul maybe, and therapy means healing. So Rofeh Nefashot, psychotherapists have a lot in common. Rofeh Nefashot, but what makes a good leader, a good person, is a person that's able to heal the soul. Why? Because he sees the soul. You can't heal the soul if you don't see the soul. And when you see the soul, you also see the positivity, the holiness in others. And that's why I think this second tool, beyond judging someone favorably just because you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, is so crucial in dealing with difficult people. This is what we find in a very interesting story in the Bible. I'll take you back to it, and then we'll read the verses in Numbers 17, 16 to 24. But this is the story about Korach's rebellion against Moses. You may remember how Korach, with 250 men, went and tried to rebel against Moses' leadership. So God decides to do an interesting experiment. What does he say? He says, well, Korach is rebelling against you and against your brother Aaron as the high priest. So let me show Korach who I chose as the high priest. And he tells Moses, tell Korach to bring his staff, and let every other leader bring their staff, sticks. And then Aaron will place his staff also in the middle of all these sticks. And the one whose staff will blossom in the morning will be the one that God has chosen as the leader. Korach agreed to this trick, to this magic. All the leaders brought their staffs. Aaron's staff was placed in the middle. And guess what? God wanted to show that Aaron was the true leader. So obviously the next morning, it was his staff that blossomed. And my question to you is this: why choose that bizarre magic? Really? Is that the way God was going to prove that Aaron is the leader? What's the idea? Let's read the verses themselves and we'll explain it. But let's read the magic, about the magic trick itself. Numbers 17, 16, 24. Does anyone want to read?
Take a staff from each of the tribe's leaders. Each should write his name on his staff. Write the name of Aaron on the staff of Levi, and the man who I shall choose, his staff will blossom.
Right.
Moses places each staff before God in the sanctuary. On the next day, behold, the staff of Aaron was blossoming. It brought forth blossom, produced fruit, and bore ripe almonds.
So that's exactly what happened. Now why? Why? Why don't you continue to read now? We'll go to the interpretation of it. I think it's just brilliant. This is by Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory in his book Likutei Sichot.
This miracle of the sticks did not come to prove who was the high priest, but rather it came to teach what is a high priest. What is a staff? A staff is a branch disconnected from its tree. It is dry and dead. How do you determine who is the individual in a generation chosen by the Almighty as the high priest, as the ambassador of God to sow the light of holiness into the hearts and souls of humanity? You search for the human being in whose presence staffs are transformed to orchards. Lifeless sticks become gardens. Dry rods become generators of growth and vitality. The individual blessed with the ability to create life out of that which appears lifeless. He is the man chosen by God as the high.
I think that's simply brilliant, because really, not only does it teach us what a leader is, it teaches us also how to deal with these difficult people, because we don't have to see the difficulty. The fact that they're difficult people is because we think they're difficult. But if we can look beyond that, if we can see in that dryness some life, if we can see in that staff a living stick, a blossoming stick, then we'll have known that they are really not difficult to begin with, and then we'll have known how to transform these apparent foes into true friends. I have to also evoke again psychotherapy, and Gila, that's your task a little bit, but I know that some of the most, the leading psychologists in our times were mostly Jewish, right? From Adler to Freud and you name it. Carl Jung wasn't, but many others were. And I think one of them, my favorite by far, shared this idea in a very powerful way. His name was Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, as you may know, was himself a Holocaust survivor. And he found out, as a cure, something in the camps that he had never thought could happen. He found out that more than people expected from life in the camps, because they just couldn't. They couldn't expect anything, not even a piece of bread. Their main question then was what life is expecting of me. I can't expect anything from life. But life is expecting something of me. Life is calling my name at this moment. And then he realized how these Holocaust prisoners, were these Jews, were listening to this call at every moment and asking themselves, well, how can I help others? Maybe life right now is calling me to bring my piece of food, my piece of bread to someone else. And everyone was trying to search at least for their purpose and actualize themselves in the best of ways, even in the harshest situations. And based on that experience, obviously he authored this book, I think the bestseller of all times. Maybe Harry Potter now is the bestseller of all times. But after Harry Potter, it's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, in which he says that in every human being, more than the sexual drives that Freud speaks about, and the genetic orders or disorders that Spinoza speaks about and others, it's the yearning for meaning. It's the soul that simply wants to fulfill its purpose in helping others. There's a great story told by Howard Schultz, who's the CEO of Starbucks, of how he once went to Jerusalem with a group of CEOs to visit some of the leaders of the Jewish people. And he actually went to Rabbi Nosson Finkel, who was of blessed memory, who was the head of the Mirror Yeshiva in Jerusalem. The Mirror Yeshiva is the yeshiva that has the most students in the world. If you walk at any moment of the day, if you walk into that yeshiva, you'll have at least 1,500 students studying at that moment. One of my great pleasures when I go to Jerusalem is just to go to that yeshiva by myself, sit there, and listen to everyone studying around me. There's nothing more transporting, more transcending than an experience like that. But the head of that yeshiva was Rabbi Nosson Finkel, and Rabbi Nosson Finkel himself was a Holocaust survivor. So when they walked him into his, Howard Schultz and these CEOs walked into his office, obviously the subject went to the Holocaust, and Rabbi Nosson Finkel then pounded his desk, as he says, and asked them, what did we learn from the Holocaust? What did you learn from the Holocaust? And they tried each with their own separate answers, and he dismissed each and every one of them. And then he says, I'll tell you what we learned from the Holocaust. See, when I was in the barracks in Auschwitz, and it was very, very cold at night, the Nazis would distribute blankets, but there weren't enough blankets. There was one blanket enough for 4 or 5 people. So the person who would receive the blanket, who would be lucky enough to have that blanket fall in his hands, had a choice. He could either keep the blanket only for himself, which would keep him warm at night, or he could spread the blanket upon 3 or 4 or 5 other inmates and keep them warm a little bit and him a little bit, but no one would really be warm for those cold nights. And Rabbi Finkel says, you know what miracle happened? Everyone who received the blanket spread their blankets upon others. Every single one. This is what I learned from the Holocaust, he tells Howard Schultz and his friends. Now go take your blankets and warm at least 4 or 5 other people. That's a powerful message from a powerful rabbi. But again, it teaches us that at the very core of the human spirit, there is this yearning of spreading our own blankets, of searching for a purpose that comes to help and elevate the world. To deal with difficult people is to know how to find that within us and to find that within others. I think therapists call it, Viktor Frankl calls it reframing our thought on others. It's not the external layers that count, but rather the internal ones. And this is what a high priest is all about, transforming really dry staffs into blossoming ones. And I think the third and final approach that we should adopt as we deal with these apparently difficult people really ties into something much greater, speaking about purpose, helping others and elevating and seeing the soul in others. There's much to learn from Joseph. Some of you may have heard this last night at the building meeting if you were there, but Joseph and Moses are, I think, some of the greatest heroes, at least the most celebrated heroes in the Talmud and in other places. But there's a reason for that. See, Joseph, as we learn in this portion, by the way, he's faced with a very difficult task. He needs to forgive his brothers. These are brothers that not only try to sell him to slavery, but try to murder him. If you remember the story, they threw him in a pit full of snakes and scorpions. They actually try to murder him. Imagine, what would you do if someone would try to murder you? Can you forgive them? Can you? I really don't know if I could, especially if it was my own brother. What? You try to murder me? It's interesting because Joseph almost follows the pattern of his own father. His father had a brother that tried to murder him. His father didn't quite forgive the way Joseph forgave. Joseph went a step further. And many point out that it's maybe to correct the forgiveness that wasn't found in the heart of his father, that full forgiveness that wasn't found in the heart of his father. But here were his brothers. He's facing them now after 21 years of separation. He's the vice king. He has the power to kill them if he wants. He has the power to imprison them if he wants. He has the power to do anything he wants with them. Instead, he chooses to forgive them. And then there's one line that he shares with them that I think is a line that every Jew, every human being should adopt in his every relationship. He says to them, we don't pay attention to the power of those words, but he says to them, yes, I'm your brother. They step back. They're filled with fear. And he says, don't be afraid, come back. Why shouldn't you be afraid? Because you didn't sell me to slavery. God sent me to slavery. You didn't sell me to slavery. God sent me there. In those few words, he shares a perspective on life that is so vital. See, because at every moment of life, we also have the choice to view life as if we were sold into it, Yes, I'm a victim. It's not me, it's my circumstances. It's not me, it's my brother. It's not me, it's my teacher. It's my wife, it's my husband. It's not me. I'm sold into all these different things. But guess what? When you sold, you're exactly like a chair. This chair was sold. Did it have any say in its sale? No. You're passive. Or you can say I was sent. Yes, it's tough. But there must be a reason right now why I'm meeting this difficult person. There must be a reason. I remember reading just a few months ago, but I have this custom that before I go to sleep, I read. I would encourage this with this age of distraction, as David Brooks calls it. We live in an age of distraction where everything, we're distracted. Just today, I went to pump gas right here on Scottsdale Road. And I realized, wow, they've really utilized every space. On the pump itself, you have an ad for the Sun Devils. On the pump itself. It's like, that's it. You're distracted everywhere you go. They've utilized everything is calling you in a different direction. But in this age of distraction, I think it's an important thing to incorporate, especially with the addiction to cell phones. Some people go to sleep with their cell phones and they wake up with their cell phones. I think it's terrible. Not only are there studies that the LED screens can really disturb your sleep and other brain functions, but it's just not healthy. You're imprisoned. You're addicted. So before going to sleep, I read a book and it soothes my spirits sometimes. At least I try to. So the book that I'm currently reading is Letters of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And as you may know, Rabbi Schneerson communicated thousands upon thousands of letters with many people around the world. And he writes to someone who obviously is having many troubles in his own marital relationships with his wife. And Rabbi Schneerson, out of character, because he wasn't that mystical, he was very mystical, but not in that sense, but out of character, writes to him, and it astonished me. He writes to him, he says, maybe the reason you're having such problems with your wife is because in your previous life you failed in marriage. You were the cause of your shalom bayit, of the peace in the home, amounting to failure. So God is putting that test in front of you once more to give you the opportunity to correct it. Well, fine, good. But what this teaches me is that even in those difficult relationships, there's purpose. You weren't sold. You were sent. That's Joseph. And I think we see that again with Moses. And you have the references in front of you. You can read them in your spare time. But Moses, it's quite astonishing because, Moses is probably one of the most celebrated leaders of all times, not just among Jews, but among others too. I know the Arabs call him Musa. In fact, there's a mountain called Abu Musa in the Sinai desert where they think that that's where Mount Sinai is. Mountain named after Moses. After all, he's the one that received the Ten Commandments, and Abu Musa, they called it. But regardless, so he's celebrated all around, but it's quite fascinating. Someone that's so celebrated, you would think that the Torah would tell you everything about him. After all, you want to connect. But when he's presented to us, we know nothing about him. He's presented to us already as the leader of the Jewish people. The only thing we know is that he was born to Jewish parents and that he was a shepherd. Did he go to Harvard? Did he go to Yale? We don't know. Did he have many friends? Was he a sociopath? We don't know. We really don't know anything about him. It's fascinating. The only thing, again, we know about him is that he was born to Jewish parents and he was a shepherd. Why that detail? If you're going to tell us there was a shepherd, tell us other details. So the Midrash catches this and says, well, it tells us that he was a shepherd because of a story that occurred as he was a shepherd that made him deserve to become the leader of the Jewish people. What's the story? As you'll see in the references. He was once leading his sheep in the mountains, and one of his sheep decided to run away. Instead of abandoning him as most shepherds would do, he ran after this lowly sheep, and he found him drinking water in from some spring that he had found. So instead now of chastising this sheep, he carries him, hugs him, and says, oh, if I only knew that you were thirsty, I would have given you water myself. I'm so sorry. And he brings him back to the flock. When God saw that, He said, this is the type of leader I want. A shepherd that cares for every individual with unconditional love. That's the shepherd I want. And that's why we are told that he was a shepherd. Otherwise, that detail would also be erased from the book. But why did he do this? And that's because he was a healer of souls, like Maimonides is called. You see, Moses, when other people saw rebellion, you could have seen that sheep as a rebellious sheep. He saw yearning. When other people saw alienation, he saw thirst. He saw something much greater. He saw the soul. And that's what he connected to. And therefore, no moment, no sheep, no person was ever difficult in his eyes. That's the power. Really, that's the power of finding purpose in everything. What Joseph introduced, Moses continues. And it's, I think, the life perspective that will help us also deal with difficult people. You know, there is a great story about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who on the high holidays one day, on the Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, he was very serious. His students knew that there was something wrong. Maybe, this year was going to be filled with decrees. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the prayer, the Baal Shem Tov leaves his synagogue and joins the synagogue of thieves. There was a synagogue where all the thieves went to. He prays with them for the rest of the day. And at the end of the day, he's all joyous and smiling. Students couldn't understand. You left us to go and join the thieves? So they asked him, what happened? And then you were joyous, what all these decrees that you may have seen were annulled? And he said, you don't understand. When I prayed with you, all the gates of heavens were locked. I knew this was going to be a difficult year. So what did I do? I went to the only people who can open up locks, who can break all these gates open. I went to the thieves. The thieves helped me break all of the locks of the heavens. The gates went wide open, and God accepted all of our prayers. Now, I don't know if this story is true or not, or if the image of the Baal Shem Tov is true or not, but it shares certainly one message. That yes, you can deal with the thief. And often we deal with these types of difficult people. But you can say, well, you know what? They have a good quality. They can break open some gates for us. So let's use that quality. Let's use the positivity within the negativity that is maybe just imaginary. And then we can become Joseph's, and then we can become Moses. And I'll conclude just with that story, with one last anecdote. But since we just celebrated Hanukkah, it's a story about a young girl who made a special gift for her father in honor of Hanukkah. When I told the story to my daughters, says it doesn't make sense. You're making up the story because you're supposed to buy me a gift. I'm not supposed to buy you a gift. Girls don't buy their fathers a gift. Anyway, but she did. She bought her father a gift. In fact, she didn't buy it, but she used the gold wrapping paper that she had in her house to wrap a special box for her father. When her father found out that she used up all the wrapping paper that's made out of gold, he became very upset at her. How dare you? You waste all this paper, this gold, for nothing, for a box. And the daughter says, well, this box is for you, Dad. So he immediately calmed down. She presents the box to her father. Her father opens the box. And he realizes it's completely empty. So now he becomes angry again. And he says, how dare you? You waste all this gold for an empty box? Is that what you do to this gold paper? And she says to the father, Dad, it's not empty. I blew thousands of kisses in it, just for you. And the dad now was melting. My friends, in life, we too encountered difficult people. We feel as if they're empty boxes. We feel as if they've wasted all of our gold. But if we dig deeper, if we become soul healers, if we adopt the approach of Joseph and Moses, we'll know how to find those kisses, and they too will melt our hearts. Thank you.